On that note, friends, I'd like to welcome you to APS Stamp Chat. My name is Heidi Rhodes. Today's Stamp Chat presenter is Mr. Rick Barrett. Mr. Barrett has collected stamps for the past 52 years, thanks to his late uncle, and has enjoyed the hobby ever since. Mr. Barrett worked in a stamp store for 3 years as a youngster and has enjoyed expanding his philatelic awareness. He joined the American Philatelic Society almost 40 years ago and is a member of several other collecting organizations. His first book, Buffalo Cinderellas, was wonderfully received and has won 2 awards, including an APS Gold Medal Literature Award. He is a big proponent of the APS and loves sharing interesting philatelic stories, most of them uncovered at the APRL and through their help. Today's Stamp Chat, go figure, is sponsored by the APRL. The American Philatelic Research Library is one of the largest philatelic libraries in the world. With 4 miles of books and journals, the APRL is a true gem in the hobby. Right now, the APRL's digital collection is available free to members and non-members, opening up accessibility to philatelists around the world. You can support the continued digitization of books, journals, and other unique items by pledging $50 to the Adopt a Book campaign, Tuesday, December 1st, on Giving Tuesday. All donations will be matched, so your $50 turns into $100. Your generosity contributes to the accessibility of information as well as the preservation of rare material. So visit stamps.org/library to donate today. Now, before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items to take care of. Today's session is a webinar, and as such, all audio and video of attendees are muted and turned off respectively throughout the presentation. However, and I always say this, please feel free to use the chat box to chat away with each other as ideas come to you and inspiration that you'd like to share with each other. You can use the Q&A box. Those will be specifically geared to Mr. Barrett for after the presentation. And please do know that this session is being recorded and we will make it available on the APS YouTube channel. And with that, we present The Wild Life of a Philatelic Swindler. Thank you, Mr. Rick Barrett, for joining us from Houston, Texas tonight.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I appreciate your kind words and your nice introduction. I'm really honored to be in Stamp Chat. I watch a lot of these, and I thank everyone else for attending tonight. It's an honor. I'll provide an overview of our time together. We'll start with just a little bit about some stamps, and I'll talk for a few moments about my personal interest in these, and then we'll focus on the fascinating story of a philatelic swindler. Following that, I'll give a very short pitch for my book, Buffalo Cinderellas, and afterwards I would be honored and excited to answer any questions that you may have, which you can put in the chat area anytime. So with that, let's get started. The Pan American Exposition was an exciting time in Buffalo, New York's history. It occurred in 1901 from May 1st until November 2nd, and it was a huge deal. Consider it a World's Fair, and the post office got involved by issuing these 6 commemorative stamps. They were the country's first bicolor commemoratives. Now, we may recall that some of the issues of 1869 were 2-color stamps, yet those are considered definitive stamps. So besides these stamps issued by the post office, there were a number of souvenir stamps issued privately to promote the expo. And here's a selection of them. The ones on the right, these 10 over here, are actually part of a 20 stamp building set. And there's actually 19 buildings or pavilions on the Pan American grounds, plus Niagara Falls. So these at the time were called labels or stickers or poster stamps. And in 1959, the term Cinderella stamp was coined. And we're not talking about this Cinderella, the Disney character that's on the 2006 stamp. We're talking about the story and the connection between her and the stamp term is that, like the character from folklore who was not invited to the ball, some felt that significant discussion of these inexpensive stamps was not welcome in serious stamp collecting circles, hence the term Cinderella stamps. So think of them as like Easter seals or Christmas seals. And I'll show you a few examples. Here's a 1917 cover with a Christmas seal on it. And next is a patriotic Cinderella on a 1942 cover. And then is a 1947 cover with a Cinderella stamp of our stamp collecting president, Franklin Roosevelt. Now, besides those other colorful stamps that were issued to promote the Pan American Exposition, these were part of an 86 stamp set issued by a fellow or associated with a fellow. And there were two designs. We'll get up close here. Two designs. One is of Niagara Falls, and the other was the bridge in Whirlpool. Actually, when the water goes over the falls, then it goes down the Niagara River here a ways and under this bridge that's no longer here to a whirlpool and off into Lake Ontario. But the 86 different varieties was 43 for each image, and they had different colored frames and different color center vignette combinations. So I fell in love with these stamps when I began collecting in 1968, and as well as the other stamps, and I saved all that I could. And I stashed them for many, many years, and here's some of the accumulation that I had. And years ago, I had the idea that I would like to share this passion with other collectors and put together some sort of pamphlet describing the varieties, and also put together a numbering system for these stamps so that others could enjoy them as well. And I tried a few different versions, and I needed some more help. So I went to a stamp show in Houston, Texas, where I live, and I met this fellow. His name is Jonathan Topper of Topper Stamps in Houston, a really fine guy. And by this time, I had understood that there were two men primarily associated with the Cinderella stamps or souvenir stamps for the Pan American Exposition. And one was a good guy and one was not. And so Mr. Topper encouraged me to follow the leads that I had and tell the story. So I decided, well, I'll give it a shot. And, you know, trying to put together the timelines of two men born in the 1870s, not these two fellas, but two other guys born in the 1870s, can be quite a task. So I wound up here at the American Philatelic Center in Bellefonte, which is home of the APS and the APRL. And they were terrific. They welcomed me. I made subsequent visits there, and I've enjoyed my time there every single chance that I've been able to go. The first time I went, I arrived on a Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and there was a pile of over 50 publications that then research assistant Scott Tiffany had put together for me, and it had my name on it for Mr. Barrett to go through. And I fell in love with the place. The APS and the APRL have been such a great ally to me in doing research and uncovering things. And one of the greatest things that I uncovered early on was a picture of this man. His name is William B. Hale, and he is our Philatelic Swindler that we're going to talk about tonight. So William B. Hale was a stamp dealer from Middle Massachusetts, and as I learned more about him, I kind of understood that I needed to go to his hometown. So I wound up in Hubbardston, Massachusetts. It's about 80 minutes west of Boston, and it's a small town of 4,700, but I got to meet with some of their members of their historical society, and they were terrific people, and they gave me some leads to follow, and this one is one that had some great information in it. Hubbardston Illustrated from 1899, and the fellow on the right is Seth P Hale. He was quite a guy. He was a real wheel in the small town. Actually, the population back then was 1,700. He had a general store. He was an American Express agent. He also was Justice of the Peace, and he was the postmaster of the town. And in 1871, Seth P Hale and his wife, Abby Hale, had their only child, William Bennett Hale. This is from the town records. He was born on May 14th, 1871. And, you know, the earliest information that I had of him as a boy or a teenager is what William shared later on to an editor of a stamp journal, that he began selling coins as stamps himself when he was 13 years old. Now, the earliest that I've really been able to confirm that was in this advertisement in the December 1886 issue of the Golden Argosy. Maybe some of our members watching tonight might remember the magazine Argosy that was around for about 90 years. Well, William had a classified ad several times in their exchange column. This was asking for U.S. coins. In exchange, he would give U.S. or foreign stamps. Now, the next year, he put out his very own stamp journal. This is the first one that he did, called the Philatelic Bazaar. He put out a little over a dozen issues. There's only 4 that remain in existence today. This is a little bigger than a business card. It's smaller than a postcard. All 4 happen to be in the Smithsonian's collection, and they are who graciously provided this scan. Now, what I find interesting about this Philatelic Bazaar, his advertisement on the back says, William B. Hale, the popular stamp dealer, all stamps sold by me are guaranteed genuine, and he's got a very short feature on the front about forgeries. So it seemed that William, as a youngster, he would have been 16 years old at the time, had his finger on the pulse of what was right and wrong. Now, later that year, he put out The Collector's World, which is a monthly international journal in the interest of collectors of all branches. He billed himself as W.B. Hale, publisher, from Williamsville, Mass. This is the first volume. He was building up his stamp business by mail, and here's the earliest cover that I've ever found. This is from August of 1888. And here's his corner card, of which he had several, and this is his own handwriting. The same year that this cover was issued, William B. Hale put out the Stamp Collector's World near the end of 1888. This is the front page article that he did on the left, and here's some of the text that was inside. He was the publisher. And you know what I came to realize as I learned more about William B. Hale through his stamp journals was that as he got a little bit older, he would have been 17 years at this time, he certainly was an educated fellow. He was able to put sentences together well and write better and better, and definitely share some perspective on collecting in a mature fashion. So William was definitely active in the stamp journal world. He began advertising profusely in the late 1880s and early 1890s. He was a member of the APA, which became the APS. And here's some covers he built up his stamp dealership with. This is from 1889, and by then he was 18 years old. He was selling wholesale and retail and dealt in philatelic publications and supplies. I note that the green 2-cent Washington stamp is on its side, and in 1891, this cover shows that William was putting his stamps upside down, the 2-cent red Washington, a different corner card here. And this next cover is from 1884, and all of the stamps are upside down. So this has a cancellation of Williamsville, Mass. We had mentioned that his hometown was Hubbardston, but let's check out a map. Here's an 1890s map of Williamsville, the town of Hubbardston. Williamsville was part of Hubbardston, and this horizontal street here that goes from left to right is actually Williamsville Boulevard. And you can see the store and post office where Seth P Hale had his business, an American Express business as well. And down the road was the home of P Hale, Seth Hale. Across the street was William B. Hale's house. And here it is today. It's still standing. And this is where William was doing a lot of his mail order from, both coins and stamps. And here's a cover from 1895 with a sticker in the upper left and a Williamsville cancellation, an upside down stamp as well. This was to Mr. Hubert Atherton, and inside I was fortunate to find a letter that had a trade written about, and the text says, "Dear sir, how have you no other things to exchange? Haven't heard from you, or Campbell either. How is that? I can have no crooked work. Let me hear. William B. Hale." So what was going on is that he definitely had his finger on what was right or wrong. He was starting to travel at this point and do less mail order, apparently because he said that his eyesight was failing him a little bit. And so William B. Hale was starting to share his wares at different cities, and do stamp talks like this at different stamp clubs. Now, he was also mentioned in several stamp dealers' address books. He was in Alva Davidson's book. This is the Beardsley book. William B. Hale put an advertisement in this one, and he called himself the traveling stamp merchant. Now, he also says that he's got a complete stock of U.S. and departments and revenues. Now, this was 49 years after our first U.S. postage stamps came out in 1847, and it was really hard at that time to be able to put together a complete set of U.S. stamps. But William had no problem boasting about it and taking that road. Here was a cover from 1897, some more mail order business he was doing with a Williamsville cancellation and a nice piece of stationery there. Now, the more that William went out on the road, because his eyesight was failing him, became apparent that he was selling stamps that were not genuine. He was selling forgeries, he was selling fakes of various kinds, and word began to get around. And one thing that also became apparent was that he had to expand his markets and his travels because he couldn't return to towns where he had previously burned some collectors. So here's an exchange that came in the fall issue of the Boston Stamp Book. I'd like to read a passage out of it and then a little bit out of my book. Under a heading titled Some Warnings, the editor of the Boston Stamp Book wrote about two unsavory situations and then printed, quote, "As to the third matter, we find it more difficult to express ourselves. The man in question is a philatelic merchant whose headquarters are in a country village in Massachusetts. He is either the victim of about all the frauds that are going on, or else is a fraud himself. His stock abounds in revenue stamps, trimmed to be reprints of the trimmed to look like imperforates, also dealing in clean stamps, which are sold for unused, and in stamps doctored to look like reprints of the 1875 issue. We have the impression that he keeps within the letter of the law and that he is fairly reliable in money matters, but those who deal with him do so at their own risk. We think there is only one man who answers to the above description, but if we have hit any honest and skillful man, we are ready to apologize to him." Well, to me, that certainly sounds like Mr. William B. Hale fits the journal's guarded description of him for a variety of reasons, and it may also explain why the Boston Stamp Book never followed up with any words of apology in subsequent issues over the following year. And so William kept advertising. Here's an advertisement in The Perforator. I believe that was from Long Island. Anyway, he called himself at this time the Stamp Drummer. Now, drummer was the term for a traveling salesperson. So William took on that moniker, Stamp Drummer. He mentions his permanent mail address, Williamsville, Massachusetts. And I note that at the bottom of his ad says, "Watch out for me." And if you were dealing with William B. Hale, you better watch out for him as well. So as William needed to expand his travels to find more marks, so to speak, in 1888, he made it all the way to the West Coast where the trolley cars are. And he connected with a fellow named Wilhelm Selschop, who was a German fellow who became a stamp dealer in San Francisco. And Selschop befriended William when he was out there. I don't know which one of these two fellows is Mr. Selschop, but there's the store. And Selschop also had a terrific stamp journal at the time, and he would put different columns in about philatelists to offer to his readers. And so one of the great things that appeared in the November 1898 issue of Philatelic Facts and Fallacies, although Mr. Selschop couldn't spell well, he certainly put out some fine editorial content. One of the neat things that was in here is only the second known picture of William B. Hale. It's pretty interesting to be able to see this fellow again. You kind of get an understanding of what his character may be like through this picture. This was smaller than a $50, a little bigger than a quarter. And so the column had some interesting antics about William B. Hale and his travels throughout the day. And Selschop mentioned that William had been on his bike and he had been hit by a team of horses. and was in the hospital because of that for a while. And William was on a train in Mexico that was held up by banditos. And as William would tell it, he said the only reason that everyone on the train survived was because he had a rabbit's foot in his back pocket. Well, we don't know about that, but he certainly was an entertaining guy. Every account that I was able to uncover points to the fact that William was a personable fellow that people really liked to be around. Even though he was swindling people, he was an exciting guy. And that wasn't the only stamp journal to put out a column on him. This is the Herald Exchange from 1899, and there's that picture we saw at the beginning. It mentions, "We take pleasure in presenting to our readers this month an illustrated sketch of the stamp drummer, Mr. William B. Hale." And at the bottom of it, it mentions that Mr. Hale is 28 years old, unmarried. He did stamp business several years before going out as a stamp drummer. And he calls at our office and always has some good news to tell us and good stamps to show. So this confirms William was a fun guy to be around. And again, he had to increase his market share, so to speak, and increase his travels. So in 1900, he put out this postcard, and it says, "From Maine to Mexico." And William puts at the bottom that, "I expect to be in your place on or about," and then he wrote, "this Monday evening at the St. Cloud Hotel." So if you got one of these from William B. Hale, you could then meet with him and either buy some things if you wanted to roll the dice, or you could sell some collectibles you had to him. The same year, 1900, he applied for a passport, and this is William B. Hale's actual passport application. He applied on the 25th of June, 1900. It was approved the next day. You didn't need to have photographs on passports until 1918, but he says here that he's about to go to abroad and he intends to return to the United States within 2 years. A couple things that are interesting as well. Towards the bottom, a description of William B. Hale, 29 years old by this time. He was 5'10" and a half with a high forehead. He had a straight nose and a medium mouth and a round chin, brown hair, light complexion, and an oval face. So that's how we get to get a little bit more understanding of who William B. Hale was. Now, about 10 days after this application was approved, he was on this ship, the SS Saxonia, and it left Boston and traveled over to England to Liverpool. William went with another stamp dealer who was from Worcester, Mass., and he went with him because he had him as his interpreter, which he would need over the coming months. Now, some of the stories about the time they were on this ship until they arrived in England were quite fantastic. Every night they would enjoy drinks with the passengers and hang around the piano and sing songs and carry on and confirm once again that William was quite the wildcat. So they arrived in England, did some business there, and then they went to France. And William wound up here at the Paris Bourse. We know that a bourse is a stamp show. This isn't basically an outdoor stamp flea market. It's actually still going on today. This is near the Champs-Élysées, although today's wares aren't stamps. They're mostly postcards and a few souvenirs. Now, William fell in love with this place. Here's another picture of the stamp bourse. And he probably liked it because there were a lot of fakes and forgeries being sold here. You really had to be on your toes. You couldn't set anything down because it would get taken pretty quickly. There were a lot of pickpockets around. And so anyway, William loved this place. And when he was in Paris, he met a guy named Alfred Baguette. He was a printer in Paris who printed not only these examples, but well over 100 more for the 1900 Paris Exposition. That too was a World's Fair. And Mr. Baguette framed the idea with William about putting together some stamps for the 1901 Pan American Exposition associated with William. And that's who printed these 86 varieties of these William B. Hale stamps. His name is on it, William B. Hale, stamp merchant. Actually, to backtrack, Mr. Baguette printed 82 of the varieties, and as the story goes, William stiffed Mr. Baguette and did not pay the bill. So Mr. Baguette had all these stamps. What are you going to do with them? And he wound up wholesaling them in France, Britain, Belgium, and India. Now, over the years, I've saved these for 52 years. The only place I've found any dealer stock of these has been in Great Britain and India. I've been fortunate to get a couple dealer stocks, and these stamps are not easy to find, these 82 varieties printed by Baguette. There were some metallic versions. You can see silver metallic over here in the lower left. There was gold metallic. There's bronze metallic. There's actually green metallic. Those are really hard to find. They may sell in the range of $10 to $50 per stamp. Now, those other colorful Cinderellas that we saw at the beginning of the presentation, those are much easier to find and less expensive. You can find those in the $2 to $15 range for most of those, but these are more difficult to locate. Now, these are the 82 varieties, and the other 4 are these 4. These are actually pretty simple to find. You can locate these most any time, and they're red and charcoal of the Niagara Falls image and bridge and whirlpool, and brown and blue frame, brown frame with blue center vignette of the same images. These, it's thought that someone in America wound up bootlegging these, and these you can usually find anywhere from $5 to $12 or so. And so this is how these stamps are associated with William B. Hale. And his trip spanned 16 months. And it was an incredible, incredible journey that he took. And it went from July of 1900 until October of 1901. He visited all these countries, and this is part of a 12-page booklet that's extremely rare. The only version I've seen is in the British Museum, and it talked of William's antics on this trip, high highs. He lived high on the hog, first class, and he also had some struggles. He was ill several times, and he also had to sleep in a barn with goats. He drank goat's milk at one point, and he ate straw. So it was quite an adventure that's interesting to read about in this story of William B. Hale abroad. And while he was on his travels, he also sold or gave out these little universal pocketbooks with his name on them. They were 2 pence. This is a really scarce item. This is smaller than a postcard. It's just got a couple pages of a stock book. And on the right shows the different languages of universal pocketbook. And he also gave out clear stamp perforation gauges with his name on it. Boy, that for me would be the holy grail to find. You know, when collections go on the market or estates turn up, most of the supplies get thrown out. So finding a clear William B. Hale perforation gauge would be just the greatest thing in the world. And so anyway, his adventures were quite timely and adventurous and remarkable. When he was in Italy, he even got to meet the Pope. Now, it struck me that when in the Vatican, you can't just go up to the door there and knock on the door and say, "I'd like to meet the Pope." This was Pope Leo XIII that William got a few moments with, and it's quite astounding that he got to spend some time with it. So William B. Hale was such a fortunate guy, and you know, people that have high highs and low lows sometimes just strike gold. So it was quite remarkable, this trip. So he got home in late October of 1901. There's no notice that's ever surfaced that he was able to attend the Pan American Exposition, the expo that have souvenir stamps with his name on it. He may have, but there was only about a 2-week window after he returned to the United States. But he did live first class again in New York City, here at the Park Avenue Hotel. This was a grand place that he did a lot of business with the dealers on Nassau Street, and he happened to be there in 1902 in February when tragedy struck the hotel. 17 people died in a massive hotel fire there. This was front page news across the United States, and William was taken to the hospital in critical condition with smoke inhalation. Now, it was reported several places that robberies were being committed while the fire was in process. And wouldn't you know, a pastor came to visit William in the hospital, and the newspaper then noted that the most serious loss yet reported of any of the guests is that of William Hale, a jewelry salesman from Williamsville, Mass. I have never heard of Williams B. Hale referred to as a jewelry salesperson. I'd heard him referred to as a salesman, as a stamp dealer, and as a musician. But the notice goes on to note that Williams said more than $5,000 in diamond jewelry and valuable stamps was lost, and that he's in the hospital in serious condition. And my sense is that he probably got on the record, so in case there was any settlement that was made or an insurance claim occurred, and William could get part of the proceeds of that. No follow-up has ever been uncovered to either of those, but it certainly would line up with William's nature. So around this same time, 1902 or so, there were 2 Cinderella stamps with William B. Hale issued on them. These are the same 2 colors as those other U.S. stamps, red and charcoal and brown and blue. And I scanned them with in proportion to a standard U.S. stamp. So these are nice sized Cinderellas. They're very hard to find. In one corner is Hawaii and the paradise palm trees there. Here's the Newfoundland, where he did a lot of business, actually. The Swiss Alps in the lower right, and the Sphinx and pyramids of Egypt are here in the lower left. His signature and 1 peso. Now, these are extremely difficult to find. I've had 4 of one go through my hands and 3 of the other. I've only seen 1 cover ever in my life with it on, and that certainly would be a neat thing to add to one's collection. So in 1906, the jig was really up. William was just burning too many collectors. And this is a notice from a January 1906 stamp journal. And after translating it, we understand that a collector had bought forged stamps from William, and he couldn't get a refund from him. So this collector contacted J.M. Bartles, who was a well-known dealer. He had an auction house in Boston. And actually, Bartles is in the Philatelic Hall of Fame. And the collector heard that Bartles had contacted Hale and would make restitution if anyone chose to contact Hale or Bartles. And as the story goes, no one ever did follow up. And William's advertising career in the stamp journals was basically over. There's no more mentions of William B. Hale after this, except 1 month later in McKeel's, when they noted that Hale had sent in something for examination. So what did he do after he had burned all the bridges and his stamp dealing days were over? Well, he became a postcard publisher. And these are some of the examples of postcards with his name on it. W.B. Hale or W.M. Hale, publisher, Williamsville, on the back of these. Most of them are from small towns in Massachusetts or New England. A lot of these, though, are nature scenes. Here's looking up the Connecticut River near Mountain Park. Here is the Cove in North Pond, and on the mountain road in winter. So there's about 400, I believe. I have 200 of them, and I know of about another 100, and more keep turning up now and then. So my sense is there's about 400 with William B. Hale's name on it. I'm really fortunate to own this one. This is a scarce card that he sent out to sell his wares at wholesale rate, and so in different quantities. And not much else is known about William B. Hale after about 1906 to the early 1920s. The next advertisement that I found, he couldn't even use his name. It was in Boy's Life magazine, and anyone that was a Boy Scout might have read Boy's Life. Well, that's where William B. Hale advertised, as well as this English stamp journal called the Postage Stamp, and he had to use a different name. He chose Spot Cash Williams of Williamsville, Mass. This is William B. Hale, and he was buying and selling stamps through these little ads. But what he was doing was he was purchasing used stamps in quantity. He would then put chemicals on them to wash the cancellations off of these stamps. Some suggest that he learned these chemicals from Mr. Alfred Baguette, who also wound up in jail in 1922 in France for washing stamps. And William was a stamp washer. Now, the post office didn't take too kindly to this. In fact, here's our current warning. It says, once a postage stamp has been used, it's a federal crime to remove, attempt to remove, or assist to remove cancellation marks from postage. It's also a federal crime to reuse a stamp, whether canceled or not. And these laws were basically the same in 1926 when they caught up with William B. Hale and they arrested him in 1926. One of the things that led to an easy conviction of Hale was that he kept a ledger, a book of all his purchases of stamps that he wanted to wash, and then all the deals that he did for wash stamps. He would sell these wash stamps to companies that used a lot of postage, and they would pay William B. Hale between 50 and 90% and save money by buying these stamps that he had also not only washed, but re-gummed. And so he was sentenced to a year and a day in this place, the Worcester County Jail in Worcester, Mass., not far from his home. I kind of wonder what his late dad would have thought of this, William going down this road. His dad had passed away just a few years earlier, and William served out most of his sentence here and some of his sentence in the Worcester hospital because of ill health. Now, did William learn his lesson? Absolutely not. William got out of here in 1927, and he went about his business in a way that was bigger than anyone else had ever done. He got up to 10 other fellows involved to be stamp agents to buy used stamps, send these boxes of used stamps to William, where he would then clean the cancellations off. He would regum them and resell them. He was doing this to the tune, his ledger shows, to the amount of $3,000 worth of deals a day. Now, and that's over $1 million a year, and that's 1920s money. So that's quite an amount. It's quite amazing what William B. Hale did on the nasty side. And he lived here in the Charleston Hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. He was going first class, and this is where he did a bunch of his deals. He had 2 rooms there. One was a suite that he lived in, and another was a room that he did his stamp washing in. And here's a letterhead from the Charleston Hotel, room 221, sent to Frank Marquis in New York. He was on Nassau Street. And these are notices of some bids that William wanted to place in an auction. And William signed it here at the bottom and noted that he was in the Charleston Hotel. Well, the feds caught up to him again, and they didn't like that. And he wound up being followed by an experienced postal inspector named William Kenyon. Kenyon wrote a book after 40 years as a postal inspector. It didn't really sell well in 1960 when it came out, so it's not easy at all to find. But he tells a lot of fascinating stories and includes text about catching William B. Hale. So I'd like to read a paragraph that comes from Mr. Kenyon's book, and he says, "I have saved until now what I consider the most amazing adventure in my entire career as an inspector in the post office department. While there are no flaming guns or violent deaths involved, the criminal was the biggest and most brazen crook I ever encountered in 40 years." Now, I wrote in my book that William B. Hale was arrested on March 27, 1929, when authorities knocked on his door at the Charleston Hotel and announced themselves as stamp dealer. William B. Hale jovially called out, "Come on in," and the entering party found him right in the middle of his personal collection and replied, "I'm very particular about my own stamps. You see, I am washing them right now. I must have them clean. I simply can't have a dirty stamp." Well, Inspector Kenyon's account of the encounter with William is truly incredible, and how fortunate we are that he published it. And Kenyon goes on to say, quote, "He laughed lightheartedly and began telling us of a lecture he was to deliver that evening at the YMCA. By that time, we'd had enough of his tomfoolery and bluntly announced who we were. Surprisingly, it didn't seem to faze him one bit, and all he asked was that he be permitted to deliver his lecture before being put in jail. The gall of the man was unbelievable. No wonder he was able to fool the public for so long." So William was arrested and once again was front page news across the country. And he was put in the Charleston jail, and bail was set at $2,000. Now, his accounts were frozen, so he was unable to make bail. And he actually stayed in the Charleston jail until the 8th of June, which was several months. And again, they got him with his ledger, and they knew that they had him. And so they put together a statement that was a confession for William B. Hale to consider signing, which he did, dated May 28th of 1928. It notes washed stamps at the top. It mentions kind of an early date, 1921, that he was involved in this. What struck me is that he put such small figures here, $64 for this deal, $55, when he was a millionaire from doing this. At the end of the letter, he notes, "I am an old man, 58 years of age, and I am in poor physical condition, and I trust that you will act accordingly." Well, William was trying to get a little favor with the federal judge, and frankly, it didn't work. He was sentenced to 20 months in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, and the 9th of June, he went there by train. It was a heck of a time. He did not take to this situation well. He was, the other inmates weren't kind to him. The guards weren't kind to him. He was in really poor health. And he had a young lawyer in Charleston who did his best, but frankly, the attorney missed a couple deadlines and was not able to follow up on a request for parole, early parole. And that did finally occur. Here's the notice from the Department of Justice dated July 9th, 1930. He had been eligible for parole in December of 1929, but it mentioned that his parole was approved effective August 10th of 1930. Well, he did get out that day, and he wound up on a train, went to Boston, and as I found out later on, he died about 6 weeks later. But what I kept uncovering first, before I understood that, was this stamp journal called the Postal Markings. This is from December of 1936. Actually, it's the first of a three-part series that also included January of 1937 and February of 1937. Some Hale hand stamps, some counterfeit canceling images that Hale was involved with supposedly. And this is what I kept uncovering over and over. The article inside Postal Markings was written by a fellow named Frank Coase. And my sense is that they must have not have gotten along at some point. Coase wrote, "When the late William Hale passed away during a sojourn in the federal custody at Atlanta, the public executor found in his possession a quantity of hand stamps and cancellation blocks." It also goes on to say the late Hale was known for his difference to the moral code, which certainly was interesting. This information was perpetuated for over 80 years. Here is a 1992 Canadian stamp journal called Maple Leafs that says basically the same information. When Hale died in 1936 in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, found in among his possessions were a number of hand stamps, etc., etc. Here's a stamp journal called the Newfee Newsletter. This is from May and June of 2008. It noted that Hale was a traveling stamp salesperson with questionable ethics who peddled in bogus items. We sure know that he did. William Hale was also jailed at one point, actually two, and died in federal penitentiary in 1936. Not so. When Hale died, a number of forged hand stamps were found, including one for St. John's, Newfoundland. Well, I kept reading this over a dozen places, and I just got to thinking, something doesn't seem right. I could never find an obituary for William B. Hale in the stamp journals or in the regular press. And so I contacted the Department of Justice in Washington to find out more about William's time in the penitentiary. And I did a Freedom of Information Act request and got William's prison card. And it notes at the top that he was in there for conspiracy, cleaning canceled stamps. The judge had seen him on June 8th of 1929. He went to the penitentiary the next day. He was eligible for parole December 27th, 1929, and it notes here that he was paroled effective August 10th, 1930, and beneath that, he died September 18th, 1930, at Massachusetts General Hospital of heart disease. This is the first documentation that I received of William B. Hale's death. Now, if one is writing or doing journalistic work, you want to always get at least a second confirmation. I contacted the Massachusetts Department of Statistics, and I got a copy of William B. Hale's death certificate. I'm not legally allowed to show it, but it confirms that William B. Hale did die on September 18th, 1930 in Massachusetts General Hospital. They said that he died of alcoholism. And the third notice that I found was his Freemasons card. They note that he became a member February 9th of 1898, and he was noted that he was deceased September 18th, 1930. So this was noted number 3. The fourth notice that confirmed that William B. Hale died of that on that date was the standard certificate of death in Hubbardston. And here it notes September 18th is when William B. Hale died. He was a salesman, and his dad is noted here, Seth P Hale. His mom, Abby Bennett, or they wrote Abby Hale and then wrote Bennett over it. And they noted in the lower right that the date of burial was September 20th of 1930. The undertaker in the town received the body of William B. Hale, and that's because there were no family members to receive William. By then, the family line had run its course. There were no brothers and sisters. He was an only child, and no aunts and uncles. So William was laid to rest in Forest Hill Cemetery in the small town of Hubbardston or Williamsville, Massachusetts. And what's interesting to note is that this small cemetery is at the corner of Williamsville Road and the Hale Road extension. How remarkable is that? That William is spending eternity right there in the Hale family plot. So that concludes the amazing story of William B. Hale in tonight's Stamp Chat. I tip my hat to you, and I'm so grateful for you being here to listen to what I'm so passionate about. And his story and others are in my book, Buffalo Cinderellas, The Gentleman, The Huckster, and the Pan American Exposition. William B. Hale is the huckster, and I'm going to do another APS Stamp Chat on the Gentleman in 3 weeks that I'm really looking forward to. So my book is available at the APS, and it's a fine quality, 180-page high-quality book, and there are several chapters of William B. Hale. There's over 300 images inside, most of them in full color. There's a lot of postal history here that's really enjoyable to check out. And in the back is a terrific stamp appendix. And here's part of the William B. Hale stamp appendix, where all of the stamps are shown in full color in all the varieties, and any collector can certainly start their collection from this point. So I thank you all again. Here's my contact information, as well as the Facebook page about my book. You do not have to be a stamp collector to enjoy my book. You can enjoy it if you're a lover of history or historical biographies. It's a great gift. And also the Facebook page is there for anyone to enjoy, not just stamp collectors. You don't have to be a member of Facebook to enjoy that. So thank you very much, Heidi, and thank you all for listening to my presentation tonight.
Oh, what a great presentation, Rick. What enthusiasm and what a great story for all. And the chat box is certainly demonstrating everyone's love of your presentation. Thanks so much. And for the information regarding Mr. Barrett's book, just go ahead and look in the chat box and we'll put that on the APS YouTube recording of this presentation. Let's go ahead and get started with some questions. Again, friends, go ahead and use that Q&A box if you have questions for Mr. Barrett. Here we go. First question, sir. Were the upside down stamps used on covers to express love, common, or write no more, less common, or some sort of protest?
Well, great question. And you're right. They were frequently used to express love. But I find it interesting that William B. Hale was using them in that format on business mail. So I don't know whether he just loved his customers or he did it for fun, or who knows. But yes, other mail that you may find if you collect with stamps upside down, it's especially fun to find it maybe on envelopes that had greeting cards inside. That was to express the sender's love for the recipient.
Another question, who did this guy's engraving and printing, and why were they able to continue to function in that regard if he was so nefariously involved in scams?
I don't know who did his the printing of his forgeries. It's very hard to find many of his forgeries, by the way. It's easier to locate some of the cancellations. So maybe that fellow Frank Coase was onto something. I can say that the Cinderella stamps that we showed here with the Niagara Falls and the bridge in Whirlpool, they were printed by Mr. Baguette in Paris, but who did the other printing? I just don't know. William was washing stamps in the mid-1890s, and so he had an idea of which chemicals worked. There were actually a lot of stamp washers in the 1890s. There were numerous notations in the stamp journals to the effect of so-and-so was caught, and these two fellas pled out or were imprisoned or whatever. But William wasn't the only one. He was definitely the one that did it on such a massive scale. So as far as the things that he sold in the late 20s, he washed those stamps himself and he re-gummed them himself. As far as who might have printed any of the forgeries, I wish I knew and could pass that information on to you. Hopefully it will surface sometime.
And I'm just dipping over into the chat box a little bit, and I would like you to know that you're receiving rave reviews on your book. So
thank you so much.
Did you verify the forged cancellations?
The only way that I verified them was that notation of them appeared in more than one journal. So I'm kind of going on what either the stamp editors put out was accurate, although I must say Frank Coase, who also went by the name F.L. Coase, not everything that has uncovered associated with him has been authentic. It's not all got integrity. I will say that my next pursuit is to try and find out more about Mr. Coase. He was an officer in several stamp societies, and so he was well known in collecting circles. He was well off. He inherited a whole bunch of money from a patent and lived well in Worcester, but I don't think that he was necessarily completely on the up and up. So I can't completely say that the information about cancellations that he published was completely accurate. So I'm going to go back to Massachusetts sometime and look through some more things and see what we can uncover.
Great. We have another question. Let's see. What numbering scheme did you come up with?
Well, I actually wound up talking to other APS members. I worked with Jonathan Topper of Topper Stamps. I worked with some people at the Collectors Club of New York, which were really kind people as well. And so we decided to go with a BC for Buffalo Cinderellas, and then we numbered the stamps that were associated with the gentleman BC 101 through 116, and then we started at 200, BC 200 to upward to 286 for the William B. Hale varieties. That way, it left some room for hopefully other varieties to be uncovered. I will say that if you do look at the book and you find the charging buffalo stamp that I'm going to include more in my next stamp chat, we found 6 varieties, and they're in the stamp appendix. But since the book was published, there's at least one, maybe more plates that we're working on identifying. So we may add another number after that. But we did BC 101 to 116, and then BC 201 to 286 for William B. Hale stamps. That's how it came about. And I will close with that by saying that, you know, every other area of collecting, it seemed, including other Cinderellas, have had numbers assigned to them. You know, you can look in Scott's and find Christmas seals have numbers. Well, no one ever took these Cinderellas from the Pan American Exposition a little bit further. So that's how I wanted to make it easy for other collectors to try and put sets together.
I'm going to combine a question with 2 of our attendees, one being Mr. Scott Tiffany of the APRL. What motivated you to write about Hale? What was it about his story which made you dedicate all this time and effort to produce this amazing story? And then weaving this in, how were you able to follow Mr. Hale's history when he went by different pseudonyms and moved around so much?
Great question. I love answering this. You know, I've done a presentation in my Houston Philatelic Society, and maybe can do a stamp chat on it, called Fun with Philatelic Publishing. Well, first of all, I have to thank Mr. Topper for encouraging me to tell the story. And once it grew, I just got infatuated with it. It became a passion. And, you know, the more that I went to the APRL, the more that I fell in love with the story over and over. And, you know, some people like to go on vacation to, you know, see the sights and everything. And I like to go to research libraries and see our friend Scott Tiffany. And who was a great help. And what I did is I would go through literally, I went through 50,000 pages of stamp journals, most from the 1890s, and looking for information about either Hale stamps or the gentleman's stamps. And when I would find a column, an advertisement, a mention, a letter to the editor, I would Xerox that and I would put it in a folder. And after many years of doing this, I put them all together chronologically and was able to recreate a timeline for each of these fellows. And it just fell into place. But I gotta say that, you know, many of us, including myself, have our collections in boxes, and occasionally we get around to sorting through things and making them look really nice and things like that. But what I love to encourage people is that when we do that, and whatever we learn from the process, we share with others. And you don't have to write a book, but share it with your friends in your local stamp club, or online if you're in a stamp club, or share it in an APS American Philatelic Philatelist article, or somewhere in that way, or a newsletter, and share it with others so it doesn't get lost. Whoever collects usually has a passion about a certain area, and it's so much fun to just follow wherever the leads go. Whenever I had a lead, I would just keep going until it became exhausted, and when I couldn't find too many more leads, that's when I began writing. And it was a wonderful labor of love. I never did this for money, and it's so much fun, and I hope others can enjoy it too.
Oh, it's just so fun to listen to you and your enthusiasm and encouragement to do this, you know, and to share the information. That's we were talking earlier, and that's the beauty of our hobby. Our final question this evening is, what will be your next philatelic adventure for publication?
Thank you so much for asking that. I actually have about 5 ideas, and yet I get pulled to possibly writing about the entire life of William B. Hale, not just his collecting things. The years that he was having legal troubles, I have so much information about that. I have over 300 pages from his attorneys and from the Justice Department that could put together a fascinating book for those that enjoy the legal aspect of things, including letters from jail Hale wrote to his attorneys. And it's fascinating. So I'm pulled in that direction just because I actually love the character, but there's other places that I meander and do little presentations. I've done presentations on that Niagara Falls and Bridge and Whirlpool stamp. I've enjoyed putting together a short talk on that. So I just love going wherever the tremendous hobby of stamp collecting takes me. So thank you so much, Heidi. And before we go, if I can just mention that anybody that happens to go to my website to purchase a book can get the standard edition, or they can get the collector's edition, which includes a block of 6 stamps that are pictured on the front cover. And there's a coupon code you can use that's 2020 deal, and that'll give you 35% off just the logo block edition, the special signed and numbered edition. There were 30 of those made, and I've got 10 more of those left. So feel free. Thank you for your interest and support. You certainly don't have to buy a book. Feel free to email me anytime you like. And I love the APS and the APRL, and thank you for everything, Heidi.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. And friends, I did put that code in the chat box, and I'm about to just send off the link to Mr. Barrett's next stamp chat on December 10th, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that question, friends, we'll conclude our stamp chat. We thank you for your attendance and ask that you join us in thanking Mr. Rick Barrett. And please, Rick, take a moment and review the chat for all of your accolades. Today's stamp chat is brought to you by the APRL. The digital collection is free to members and non-members through November 30th. Please consider donating to the Adopt a Book campaign this Giving Tuesday, December 1st. Every dollar donated is being matched, so magically turn $50 into $100 by contributing on Giving Tuesday. Support worldwide philatelic research and help us digitize the APRL's collection so members around the globe have access to the important books and journals that provide the basis for research endeavors and literary endeavors. You'll also be preserving old and rare items that can be preserved ad infinitum and made available to all. Visit stamps.org/library to make your donation. For more stamp chats, visit and subscribe to the APS YouTube channel where you will find nearly 80 presentations. Use the comment box below to keep the conversation going. Until next time, collect, connect, find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course on stamps.org. The American Philatelic Society, social since 1886. Thank you so much, Mr. Barrett. It has been a joy. We will see you December 10th. Thanks, everyone. Good night.